My name's Emile. I am the acting director of the Southwest Climate Hub. Climate Hub covers 5 states and part of a 6th in the southwestern region of the United States, but we are located here. We were chosen, the Jornada was chosen because of the amazing scientists here and the really good work that's done here. So we are the Southwest Climate Hub. I'm going to start with showing you this video that is part of the Climate Hub program. This kind of encapsulates, demonstrates what we do. So let's see if this works.
Well, right now, what we're trying to do here at the Jornada is really define a breed of cattle that are efficient and sustainable in arid regions.
We're evaluating strategies for sustainable cattle production from western rangelands, and so we're looking, of course, focusing on these harsh, challenging desert environments, and we're looking at effects on rangelands and the capacity to produce cattle that in a profitable way with a smaller environmental impact, but then all the way up through the supply chain.
If we see these animals, we see them from the very tip of South America, down in Tierra del Fuego, all the way up into Canada. And so we see that these animals for 500 years have been here, that they have adapted to all these different environments. So what better animal could we be looking for?
The criollo is a very efficient cow on the land, and we see that in every, up north in South Dakota where it's snowy and cold. They're a super efficient grazer and converter of grass and other forages into meat. And also down in the Southwest where drought is an issue, they're a super drought efficient animal as well. So they're really multi-talented, if you will, in the ecosystem. And that's one of the reasons that we really like the breed. The research that's being done at the Jornada is pretty integral to our production of these animals.
My name's Rob Paulin. I work for a cattle ranch in Southern California in the mountains east of a large metropolitan area. And it is pretty much all chaparral woodlands. The reason we have started to switch over the criollos because they appear so far to be much more adapted to the fragile nature of our high desert country.
What we do is we put GPSs on both the criollo cattle and Angus crossbred, and so that we can do comparisons on them, see how they move the landscape. And so we have vegetative map that we can refer to, and we can pinpoint the areas that they're using. And we can also, with the GPS, know if they're grazing or if they're drinking water.
We have mobile places mapped with ecological states, so we're actually able to tell their use in terms of states, which we can then link to state and transition models and think of that change over time.
We are working in semi-arid areas and desert areas, and I think that really is important because 60% of the landmass, Earth's landmass, is desert. And so we're not only influencing here in our areas, but we're also influencing internationally. And so we're trying to get involved internationally because of that reason and working with the same type of cattle. And I think that this is part of this whole story of climate change and adapting to climate change with these animals.
So that's what we do. It's about science to services around adapting to and mitigating some of the impacts of climate change. That was just one example of some science that's here at the Jornada, and we'll talk about more. This presentation today, it's a group effort like many things. So my colleagues Caiti Steele and Julian Reyes will also be presenting. I could not have picked, or we could not have picked, a better date, a Friday closer to the exact 5-year anniversary of the Climate Hub. So this headline I pulled off the internet last night. USDA creates climate hubs for each region, and they were announced February 5th, 2014. So 5 years and 3 days ago, basically. So we've been around that long, and I'm going to tell you how this network has changed over the 5 years as I go through, and some of the stories of what happens when you try to set up a climate change network in USDA and how that works and how it doesn't. This picture is pretty much everybody from across the 10 hubs that are across the nation. We are one of 10. When they were here, you'll see our building in the background for the all hands meeting that happened a few years ago. So today, I will give you some of our program context. I'll talk about the program status, my favorite accomplishments of the past year, not the past 5 years, and then where we're going, what some of our priorities are, and where we think we're going in the future. When the hubs were formed, our mission is to develop and deliver science-based region-specific information and technologies to both agricultural and natural resource managers that enable climate-informed decision-making. And part of the reason for that is that this is a one USDA effort. So 5 of the hubs are located at Forest Service research stations, and the other 5 are ARS. So we work with a lot of different managers, managing a lot of different landscapes, and we need to serve all of those agencies that are funding us. The original vision was robust and healthy agricultural production and natural resources under increasing climate variability and change. I think that's important. It's not just maintaining, it's actually improving despite climate change. And that's a challenge, right? That's a lot that we need to do. It's our grand challenge. We in the Southwest, as we're known to do, have created our own vision, which is resilient landscapes and resilient communities. And that's what we try to work towards. One thing that changed, a lesson learned for me, was that when these hubs were first established, there were 7 regions across the US, and there were 3 sub-hubs. So 3 subsidiary hubs. They got about half the funding of the original hubs. Now there's a network of 10 hubs. That does not work well. So if ever you have to set up a national network, don't establish 2 different layers with uneven funding, because that didn't work well. Now we're a network of 10 hubs, but the funding is still, the sub-hubs still have about half of what they originally had. Our first meeting was in Nunn, Colorado in 2014, and at that meeting, we came up with 7 functional areas as a team. That's a lot. Over time, those have coalesced into 3. This is what we do. This is how we do our work. We do research and science synthesis. So that's really my area of the hub. That's where I kind of focus my efforts, although we all do some of that. Tool development and tech transfer, and Julian has really championed that, has taken that to another level for us. And stakeholder education and outreach and engagement, Caiti really leads that and has created some really amazing relationships and partnerships over the last 5 years that have fostered our ability to do our work. We also work with the Asombro on the education part, and Helena is now building relationships with tribes across the Southwest, so that's part of our effort. So here we are, you know most of us. This is our core team. We also have co-leads. Forest Service co-lead Bryce Richardson, he works on sage grouse and sage brush. Our other Forest Service co-lead is Christian Giardina. We realized about a year ago that we needed someone in Hawaii because it's hard to work in Hawaii from here, and that's in our footprint. So Christian helps us with that. Joel, he's our NRCS co-lead, and then Steve Smerek is actually the state resource conservationist for Arizona, and he is our liaison. He's working on a dust mitigation handbook. And I couldn't have our team up here without having Al, who, of course, we all know. He was my advisor, the first director, worked really leading and establishing this hub for the first 4 years. So Al really set this up for us and is still really the foundation of this hub. There's a charter. There were only 2 requirements in that charter. One was we needed a steering committee. The second was we have to have a 5-year review. We're doing both of those things, but our steering committee is really great. We have members of APHIS, Rural Development, Farm Services Agency, Risk Management Agency, the New Mexico Department of Agriculture. This is a really great way to connect with people at a lot of different land-grant universities, and we wanted to just have an annual meeting with them. And it turns out everybody wants quarterly meetings. So we have an annual in-person meeting, and then we update them quarterly. So people care about the mission and are very engaged, which honestly, that is, in 5 years, that's a big step. How do we operate? So what happened when this hub was formed? There was a bump in our base funding, basically. Covers our salaries, and we end up having about $100,000 a year left over for small projects. That's it. We are not like one of the climate services organizations that gives huge grants. There are some of those in other parts of the federal government. That is not us. We also have a fellow, and our fellow, Julian, is funded by interagency agreements. 4 different agencies put money each year into that funding. We're working on a dust mitigation project, an air quality project with Dr. Dubois, who's the New Mexico State climatologist, who most of you know, he's here. Some money to expand a tool called GrassCast, which is an iterative tool that helps forecast what the productivity will be on the landscape. And right now it's working really well in the northern plains. It's moving to the southern plains, and we're trying to move it to the southwest in 2020. So we have some money to test those relationships to make sure that what the product we're putting out is strong and good for producers to use. We usually get about $50,000 a year from the Office of the Chief Economist in USDA. We usually use that for drought work because that seems to be one of our biggest issues in the Southwest. And we just got some money because we have really great technical skills here at the Jornada to help a team with another climate tool that they're working on. And we also work with other people. We get some external projects. Amy Ganguly, I saw her earlier. There you are. Caiti's working with her on the Arid project. We're working on another project with CU and some other things. So although funding within USDA may be tenuous, we're finding these other sources where people want to work on things. Another thing that came in was enhancing the wind erosion research network. So we got some more funds for monitoring that we were able to give to Nick, and he fortunately is helping us and is installing those, using those to install more equipment. So that works, actually. When there's a need that the Office of National Programs has and something that we can do on the ground, it's helpful. One of the first things we did when we got this climate hub, and Al and Chris really did this, was to establish relationships with land-grant universities across the Southwest. And initially, we just gave them all some funds and said, do some climate work in whatever way you want to. The change that we now have is that folks from these agencies, these groups, apply. They basically say, this is what we want to do. We have the funds. We give those funds to them. But I think the relationship has been really important, especially for reaching some places that are far away from New Mexico, like Hawaii. So that's been helpful for us. And we have a relationship or an agreement with the Sombro, and then also one now with Fort Lewis College in Durango, because I'm affiliate faculty there, and they give me my office, so that helped to have that agreement. So these are our big accomplishments. We completed a special issue in the journal Climatic Change that we completed that this past year. That was based on our vulnerability assessment. We're pretty proud of that. It took a lot. I did not realize how much a special issue takes. Now I know. I was also the lead author on the Southwest Chapter Agriculture agriculture section for the 4th National Climate Assessment. Julian launched the Ag Risk Viewer this last year, and that has been quite an effort and has gotten quite a lot, and he'll tell you more about that. Asambro completed the Climate Change and Agriculture module. That's 6 hours, tied to standards, really a great freely available module that we're working on spreading across the Southwest. Helena has been working really hard on building relationships with tribes. That's a process. And so she has gone to tribal agricultural conferences, 3 of them last year, reached out to over 300 people there, had 2 different tables at 2 other conferences, agricultural conferences, and also been working with Dr. Dubois on cocoa RAS, which is rain gauge monitoring, and gave out some cocoa RAS gauges this last year. And then finally, outreach is really important, and what Caiti champions, and she's really built these extension partnerships and held some drought response meetings with a lot of other partners, National Drought Mitigation Center, Farm Service Agency, and others. So she's done some great work. So this is from the National Climate Assessment, and it's showing the shift in plant hardiness zones. So this is historical and different 1976 to 2005. This is the highest emissions scenario, but one that we're tracking most closely. That has implications for us, right? For our work, for what we think about, and what we might want to plan for. This is also from that chapter, and this is something that I really like that we did, and it's how are we responding to these climate change impacts? What are some of the good things that people are doing? Rooftop solar, cultural fire restoration, some coastal protection. You can go to the National Climate Assessment itself to read about some of these things. It's in the Southwest chapter. There are 2 volumes to this assessment. The first volume is just the climate data and the projections, and the second volume is the impacts. So it's dense, and it's really the go-to source right now for what we know about climate change. Our team has put together 6 priorities that can be implemented in those 3 functional areas. So research and science synthesis, outreach and education, and tool development. That's what we do. That correspond with national fiscal year 19 program priorities. So there is an executive committee at the national level, and they also gave us priorities. So we have to mesh what we're doing with what they would like us to do, and that worked out pretty well. And they're consistent with the hub program vision and mission that I mentioned before. And so this is what we really are working on in this. It took about 5 years to get to this point where we really know what the needs are and how we can operate. We're working on understanding climate risks in the Southwest, how communities can adapt to these changes we expect, increasing resilience to drought, sustaining resilient landscapes and communities, enhancing access to some of our programs and products, because we've developed a lot in the last 5 years, but now it's a matter of using those education modules, of building more on the relationships that we have, of helping with cocoa RAS. That's been very effective. So enhancing what we are already doing, and then delivering a One USDA mission. I think that this is one of the real examples where I work with people from APHIS and Risk Management Agency and all of the USDA agencies. That doesn't happen very often. And so trying to do that well is important here. So we continue to do that. And Caiti and Julian will tell you about their lessons learned. I have 2. After the last 5 years, 2 big things that I learned. So I learned about partnerships and the value of working together with other hopeful people to adapt to climate change and who work on mitigation, because there are many people out there who care a lot about this, and working with partners I think is really important. I also learned that it takes about 5 years to figure out what you're doing when you're starting a national program. So those are my 2 big lessons learned.
So I'm going to talk to you mostly about my lessons learned, and every time I think I know everything, kind of find out that there's still so much more to learn. We did 3 drought meetings in 2018, one in Ogden, Utah, that was in October, and that was with the National Drought Mitigation Center and a couple of drought monitor authors. One in Belen, New Mexico, and that was with extension folks here at New Mexico. And we went up and talked about livestock strategies during drought. And one in Farmington, New Mexico, where we, again, worked with extension personnel and talked about water and cropping strategies. And also at that particular meeting, the Office of the State Engineer joined in and talked about water sharing. So thanks to Emile, who built some good relationships with NIDIS and other folks, we hosted a couple of webinars on drought and the drought outlook. Those were really popular. And we also had 3 Kokoraz outreach events, 2 with Navajo Nation audiences, thanks to Helena and Dave Dubois. With our partnerships with Extension and others in land-grant universities, our outreach actually spreads so much further than what we do. And this is absolutely necessary. Without our Extension partners, we couldn't reach the people that we really need to reach. So this is an example from the University of Hawaii. We actually had a climate forum in American Samoa. This climate forum, really successful. They had 65 people attending that included, obviously, the people presenting, like the extension faculty and NOAA and Weather Service staff. But you had other folks there from national parks, from the American Samoa EPA, Coral Reef Advisory Group, and most important of all, there were 10 farmers. Doesn't sound like a lot, but these were high-ranking Matai or titled chiefs. And when you're working with indigenous populations and with tribes, I'm sure Helena would agree that you do start at the top and you ask permission to do outreach. In Nevada, our partners there held actually 2 fora on on saving snow, which included a screening of the film Saving Snow and then public discussion afterwards. And a forum on climate change and public health, again, a screening of a film and then discussion of how climate change is going to affect public health. Plus, there are also surveying personnel in Extension determine their climate outreach needs. Primarily Mike Crimmins, as you can see at the bottom here. Mike Crimmins is famous. If you want to talk about climate change, weather, anything like that, in the Southwest, Mike Crimmins is the person to go to, as well as our very own Dave Dubois. So U of A have actually held multiple grower and My Range workshops. My Range is a really novel network which distributes rain gauges, not unlike Kokoraz, but these are bigger gauges that are designed to be left out for weeks on end and read occasionally. And they're designed in such a way that they don't lose too much through, or anything, through evaporation. So, starting with my personal reflections, this is where I started in 2015. If you want to do a workshop, get a bunch of scientists together. All together, you pick a topic, you build an agenda, pick a location, invite an audience, and book a good caterer. Probably the bottom is the most important. Nope, nope, nope. I had to get a dog in there somewhere. If you don't know me very well, I have 8 dogs. If you're getting a group of scientists together, you're starting at the top. You're taking what they know and what they would like to share. Unfortunately, it was a hard lesson for me to learn, this isn't always what people want to hear about on the ground. So I wrote here, if you're using this top-down approach, you're often going to have difficulty reaching workshop goals, because what the top-down approach assumes is that everybody you want to reach has a high propensity to adopt the behavior you're selling in your workshop. And I've missed out a key word here, but most people are not innovators or early adopters. So this is the diffusion of innovation curve, and I'm using it here simply to make a point about communication. So if you're talking to innovators and some of these early adopters, all you need to do is give them a bit of information and they're probably going to act on it because they are seeking it out. But most of your people are in this part of the curve, in the early majority or late majority. And if you look along this x-axis here, you've got propensity to adopt, low to high, propensity to resist, low to high. So most of what you've got here are people who pretty low propensity to adopt, or they're kind of likely to resist what you're trying to sell them. So this is my most recent lesson. I actually learned it this last week at the National Association for Conservation Districts. And that is, if you are trying to reach most people, these middle adopters, who are hesitant to change, who don't want to think about failure, they don't want to get things wrong. They use short time frames. They don't think about the future. They think about what's bothering them now. What are the barriers they're facing now? And they're also concerned with what others are doing, and use that to define what they do. They're very much part of the group. They want to be seen to be following the norms. So if you're trying to reach the middle adopters, you need to talk to them differently. So that's no scientific jargon, perhaps no scientists. Perhaps you should be looking for the people who connect with them best, is one of the messages I learned this last week. So in reviewing how to do better outreach, we need to be talking to stakeholders or their trusted advisors. And their trusted advisors, such as Extension or Conservation District folks or FSA or the guy in the seed store, those are pretty much our stakeholders too. But we need to be talking to them and asking them, what do you want us to teach you about? What do you need from us? And if you're holding a workshop, where is a good place to hold a workshop? So holding a workshop at a fancy hotel might not work really for some of the people who want to come in their dirty boots and work clothes and spend a few hours with you and then go back to work. That's just one example. And engaging speakers, we need to be asking who's the best speaker for the audience, but who is also authentic. So I've read up about all kinds of stuff, like how to improve irrigation, how to improve soil health. Am I an expert? No. Am I connected with the communities? No. Do they know me? No. So anything I say is just going to be water off the duck's back. So it's part of my job to find out who is the best person to speak to folks if we're wanting them to learn about practices that will help them in their production, help them in their rangeland management, and so forth. So, building a workshop from the bottom up. We engage speakers, then we build the agenda, perhaps talking with, definitely talking with the trusted advisors, definitely talking with our speakers, making sure it's not just a hose pipe presentation kind of thing, making sure there's plenty of time for side conversations, and then invite the audience, book a good caterer. Still quite important, still keeping it in there. So getting it right. We've got things right purely more by luck than by planning so far. So we've been pretty fortunate, but mostly it's because we have been talking to the right people out of necessity. So, for example, that Ogden meeting, one of the responses was, and this is what we planned the meeting for, this was our main goal, but this response really sums it up. We took drought monitor authors, introduced them to FSA and other state and federal agency personnel so they could find out how the drought monitor map is put together and how they can contribute and how their drought impact reporting and precipitation measuring is important. So this meeting prepared me to explain the process in a very contentious public meeting. Because of the understanding I gained at the workshop, I was able to diffuse misunderstandings. Thank you. It was perfect, again, thank you. The meeting was needed, and I hope we can get better organized in Utah. And what happened after that was the FSA then approached the state and had a second meeting. The FSA kicked off with another meeting to improve drought reporting in Utah. And then the webinars, invaluable for those of us on the San Juan National Forest tracking fire weather, drought, hydrologic conditions. Very helpful, spot on, relevant information. Hope to see more in the future. And those webinars and transcripts are still hosted on drought.gov if you're interested. But more importantly, 30 plus, for our profile, 30 plus newspaper articles resulted from those webinars.
I'm briefly going to go over a few tools and then kind of focus on my lessons learned. So I gave this Friday Bytes talk when that picture of Al was taken actually over a year ago about the egg risk viewer. And it's essentially, it hosts crop insurance loss data. So if you don't know, over $100 billion worth of crops has been insured for the past couple of years, and that's a lot of money. And from 2001 to 2016, about $100 billion actually paid out to farmers that is triggered by a loss event, such as a drought or hail or excess moisture event. So Jeb and I and a lot of folks here at the Jornada have been working on this tool to really provide an interactive data viewer to download the data, but also view the data on the fly. Because at the moment, or still, they're just Excel files on a website, which is that's not how it should be. So the website's down here at southwestclimatehub.info/RMA. You can kind of play around at that. And this is our landing page called Agricultural Risk in a Changing Climate. And here's what the page looks like when you want to, the data are available at the county level. You can also aggregate by state. And Jeb was able to, thinking back about lessons learned, I kind of had an idea. I sketched it out and I was like, Jeb, can you do this? And he was like, yeah. I'm like, cool, that's easy. But, for this past 3 years, it's kind of been like, it's been a journey. And when you think about developing a tool, we develop a lot of tools, but you ask yourself, who's actually going to use it? Did I actually develop something that no one's going to use? Well, we know people are using it because people on Twitter are saying, what is that tool that looks at crop insurance? And I'm like, you mean this thing? And she's like, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. I'm like, yeah, that's me. Here's the tool. But it's also been used in decision making. So I have a quote here from, I think his title is Drought Coordinator in Washington State, but I call him the Drought Czar. And he emailed me talking about the ag risk viewer, and he said, and so the question arose whether the state should be invoking a formal drought declaration. With the aid of your tool, however, I was able to determine that in the areas with the largest precipitation anomalies, there have only been a handful of historic crop insurance claims, even in previous drought years. So he was able to use the tool to help inform the governor about whether to declare a formal drought declaration, essentially, related to agriculture, of course. And so I thought that was really cool that it was used in a formal decision-making process. And so now I'll go over two other tools that we're extending into the Southwest that Emily mentioned. The first is GrassCast. And again, this is kind of a laundry list, just a description, but if you'd like to access GrassCast, you can access it at this website, or just Google GrassCast. But essentially it provides kind of three different maps of what if. What if you have above normal precipitation, what if it's near normal, and what if it's below normal? And the question is kind of how much more or less grass will my county have? The precipitation is those three different types. And that's developed in partnership with folks at U of A, at Colorado State University, and all sorts of other folks at NOAA. And the second tool is AgBizLogic, which has been developed out of the Northwest, and we're hoping to extend it into the Southwest. And it's really a suite of economic, financial, and environmental decision tools for businesses to make short, medium, long-term investment decisions. And part of that is called AgBiz Climate, of course, and that really explores the costs and benefits of different adaptation options, such as shade cloths or adjustments in investment or commodities. And so I think it's also being extended into the Northeast and hopefully the Southwest. And so now I'll go into kind of some lessons learned. So when Emily asked us to give a Friday Bytes, I was like, haven't I done that already? So of course, using my Twitter skills, I found out this is my third Friday Bytes. So then I was like, what's different? Probably my haircut. I'm actually awake versus this other picture here. So that's just kind of funny. But aside from that, it's kind of been a journey, as I mentioned, especially talking about the ag risk viewer, my primary accomplishment, taking it from a bunch of Excel files on a website really to this awesome viewer that people are using, whether or not it works. And they're using it for decision making. And in our three functional areas, there's tool development. We've developed some interesting research questions and syntheses, and trying to publish some papers, and using it as an outreach tool to really teach people about the crop insurance program, where your taxpayer money is going in terms of the federal crop insurance program, which is that financial safety net for producers. So some of my final lessons learned in terms of the ag risk viewer and some of the outreach I've also done when engaging with stakeholders. I like this quote someone told us once: for scientists, is to sit down, shut up, and listen. And that's really hard sometimes, but sometimes you just have to do that and listen to what the folks really want. And don't expect folks to come to your venue, make an attempt to go there. And also just being there in presence, very important. Using existing networks to achieve shared goals and being a connector. Emily and Caiti touched on that as well. And really providing opportunities to empower others to share their science and stories is also important. So really providing that venue for folks to share what they've accomplished is also important. So we convene a lot of sessions, such as at the American Geophysical Union fall meeting. That's also important.